We speak to the Spirit of life, the eternal. We speak to the mysterious thread that connects us one to another and also to the universe. We speak to the deep wisdom at the center of our beings. We embody the yearning of all people to touch each other more deeply, to hear each other more keenly, to see each other's joys and sorrows as our own, and know that we are not alone, unless we create solitude for ourselves, and even then, community awaits us. Out of our yearning, we have come to this religious community. May we help each other to proclaim the possibilities that we see, to create the community we desire, to worship what is worthy in our lives, to teach the truth as we know it, and to serve with justice in all the ways that we can, to the end that our yearning is assuaged and our lives fulfilled in one another. May peace be yours. Our opening thought this morning comes from Elie Wiesel from his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech. He writes, "We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented." Our next reading comes from James Baldwin from his Notes of a Native Son. "I love America more than any other country in the world, and exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually." Our next reading comes from Barbara Ehrenreich from her work, Family Values from the Worst Years of Our Lives, Irreverent Notes from a Decade of Greed. She writes, "No matter that patriotism is too often the refuge of scoundrels, dissent and all-around hell-raising remain the true duty of patriots." Sometimes being for love and for justice requires us to work against those forces in the world that perpetuate hate, violence, and injustice. Sometimes to be for something, we have to be against something. My discourse this morning addresses this difficult and sometimes complex reality of how living a life for love and justice leads us to actively work against the systems of hate and injustice that are in our world. We cannot be fully for something unless we are also against the systems that keep what we are for from becoming a reality. We cannot simply all get along with each other when some of us are supporting systems and beliefs that are unjust and that are harming others. Getting along with each other in such a context would be perpetuating the injustice and the harm that is being brought about. If we say we are for racial justice, but we do nothing to work against the systems that perpetuate racial injustice, then we really are not for racial justice. We cannot be for love and justice without being against hate and injustice. We cannot be for democracy without being against autocracy and fascism. We cannot be for the poor without being against the systems that continue to exploit them. We cannot be for women without being against patriarchy. We cannot be for the liberation of the oppressed without being against those who oppress them. With the world's climate scientists informing us that we have less than 10 years to make a radical shift away from the use of fossil fuels, we cannot be for climate justice without being against long-term infrastructure projects that continue to make us dependent on the use of fossil fuels. We cannot be for beloved community without being against the evils of racism, poverty, militarism, and ecocide. Being for something without being against anything. Being for something without being against anything is most likely going to change nothing. Those with excessive amounts of wealth and power are actually fine when other persons are for a number of causes. They're fine with that. It's fine to be for a number of causes as long as we don't actually start working against that which keeps those who are rich and powerful. It's fine to be for things as long as you aren't against those things that would hurt the rich and the powerful in our society. Being against injustice in this world is not easy. And we know from experience and looking at others who have done it that it is not risk-free. Martin Luther King Jr. was not killed because he had a dream. He was not killed because he had a dream. He was murdered because he worked against the systems keeping the dream from becoming a reality. And it should be noted that very little frustrated Martin Luther King Jr. more than so-called white moderates who said they were for racial justice, but who were against taking the actions necessary to make it a reality. If Jesus had only been for love and for the forgiveness of our individual sins, he might have died of old age. But he was also against injustice. He was also against oppression, and Rome would not allow that. No one benefits more from the narrative that Jesus, quote, died for our sins. No one benefits from that narrative more than the purveyors of empire, who would prefer that we not focus on the fact that Jesus was executed because he was seen as a political threat to the empire. Empires would much rather see Jesus' death as a sacrifice of blood atonement for our wrongdoings, instead of seeing it as the unjustified execution of an innocent person who was murdered because he was living to liberate persons from oppression. Empires would much rather that we point the finger of blame for Jesus' death at our own individual sins, rather than seeing it as the state-sponsored murder of a person who was bringing good news to the poor and liberation of the oppressed in resistance to the unjust systems of the empire. The Christian denomination that I've served as a minister for 32 years, doesn't seem like it's been that long, but it has, provides us, I think, with another illustration of this complex reality of when we're for something that we also have to be against something. Over the past 54 years, that's how long the United Methodist denomination that I serve has been in existence. It was in existence in different forms before that, but in 1968, the Methodist Church and the Evangelical United Brethren Church came together to form the United Methodist Church. And over the past 54 years, the United Methodist Church has been a case study of a muddled middle expression of a centrism that cannot hold. A muddled middle expression of a centrism that cannot hold. It is a case study that shows us we cannot be for some things without being against other things. For the sake of unity, my United Methodist Church allowed our institutions to be both for and against the same things. And we try to do this at the same time. We said we were for the inclusion of all people. That's what we said. It was in our documents. But we were against actually including all people in the full life and ministry of the church. We said we were caring for all of creation. But we were against divesting from the fossil fuel industry that is destroying a livable climate. We said we were for peace. We said we were against unnecessary wars. But we were not against honoring a United Methodist who happened to be President of the United States, who executed one of the most unjust wars in our nation's history. We said we were for immigrants and for refugees, yet we were against holding a United Methodist who happened to be the Attorney General of the United States, who used a warped interpretation of Romans chapter 3 to justify separating refugee children from their families and holding them in detention camps. We were against holding him accountable for using that warped interpretation of Romans 3. We were both for and against the same things. Now that the United Methodist Church is splitting up, falling apart, splintering, in spite of its misguided efforts to preserve unity by being both for and against the same things, will my denomination finally recognize that we are not called to be the muddled middle, but rather to draw the circle of inclusive love wide? Will all religious groups realize that we are not called to be the muddled middle, but to draw the circle of inclusive love wide, to bring peace and justice to all creation, and also to welcome the stranger, to welcome those who are in need, to be with those who are the most vulnerable? Will we finally realize that the beloved community does not come through the muddled middle of centrism, but rather it comes through the revolution of values that only radical love and radical justice can bring? Will we finally realize that being for love, justice, peace, and the care of all creation means that we have to be against the evils of racism, prejudice against persons who are LGBTQ+, poverty, militarism, and ecocide? In the fierce urgency of now, the world does not have time. We don't have time left for religious institutions to be both for and against the same things, in the false hope of maintaining unity for the sake of institutional survival. And it is a false hope. Look at the United Methodist Church. We try to be all things to all people. We try to be for and against the same things at the same time in order to keep people together, to not rock the boat, to keep people unified. And what's happening? We're splintering apart. We're falling apart. The muddled middle of centrism cannot hold. What we need, and what the world needs now, are both religious and non-religious institutions to take the well-being and the survival of the world, and also the well-being and survival of all humanity, more seriously than institutional survival. And if we are for the world's survival, we have to be against all of the systems that are tearing it apart. Our parting thought comes from Emma Goldman from Love Expands. The strongest bulwark of authority is uniformity. The least divergence from it is considered the greatest crime. The wholesale mechanization of modern life has increased uniformity 1,000-fold. It is everywhere present in habits, tastes, dress, thoughts, and ideas. Its most concentrated dullness in public opinion. Few have the courage to stand out against it. The one who refuses to submit is at once labeled queer, different, and decreed as a disturbing element in the comfortable stagnancy of modern life.